You're not half the person your sister is." My mother's words cut through the cheerful Thanksgiving dinner chatter, silencing the room. She had no idea that the very roof over her head was secured by the daughter she just called a failure. And I decided, right then and there, that the free ride was over. If you know what it feels like to be the underdog, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Because this is the story of how the underdog finally bit back. The first lie of Thanksgiving dinner is that you're happy to be there. I told that lie to myself in the car, practicing a neutral, pleasant expression in the rearview mirror as I drove through the gilded gates of my parents' neighborhood. Each perfectly manicured lawn and oversized brick house was a testament to a life I was helping to fund, yet would never be a part of. My own car, a reliable but modest sedan, felt like an intruder among the gleaming Lexuses and BMWs parked along the curb. Before I even rang the doorbell, the familiar weight of inadequacy had settled onto my shoulders like a heavy winter coat. When the grand oak door swung open, the warmth and smell of the house hit me first. It was a carefully curated scent of comfort roasting turkey, cinnamon, cloves, and a hint of pine from the ridiculously early Christmas decorations. It was supposed to smell like home, but to me, it smelled like an obligation. My mother, Eleanor, greeted me with a kiss on the cheek that didn't quite land, her eyes already scanning over my shoulder to ensure the door wouldn't let in a draft. "Aspen, you're here," she said, her voice smooth and polished, just like the gleaming hardwood floors under my feet. "Put your coat in the closet. Dear, dinner is almost ready." I slipped off my coat and my shoes. My new black dress, the one I'd hoped would serve as a kind of emotional armor, suddenly feeling thin and insufficient. In the dining room, my father, Richard, he was performing his favorite ritual, unveiling the wine. He was holding a bottle with a label I didn't recognize, but I knew from the reverent way he handled it that it was exorbitantly expensive. "And here she is," Dad's voice boomed, finally noticing my presence. He pulled me into a perfunctory, one-armed hug that smelled of expensive cologne and the faint, woodsy scent of his study, just in time for the main event. "We're celebrating our champion tonight." Of course, he wasn't talking about me. His gaze was fixed on my older sister, Chloe, who was leaning against the fireplace, a vision in a champagne-colored silk dress. She was recounting a story, her laughter bright and effortless, drawing a small circle of aunts and uncles into her orbit. Chloe, the youngest associate at her firm to win a major corporate litigation case. Chloe, the star of the family. Chloe, the sun around which we were all expected to gratefully revolve. We soon settled around the massive mahogany table, the crystal chandelier above us casting 1,000 tiny, mocking rainbows onto the pristine white tablecloth. Dad began the pouring ceremony, giving a short lecture on the wine's French origins and impressive vintage, only the best for our girl. He concluded, raising his glass toward Chloe. The rest of the family eagerly followed suit. To Chloe, my uncle cheered. The family's legal eagle, the chorus of agreement, and the clinking of expensive crystal filled the room. I lifted my simple glass of water, the gesture feeling hollow. I felt a familiar pang in my chest, a dull ache I'd carried for as long as I could remember. It was the pain of being perpetually in the background, a supporting character in the grand production of my sister's life. I waited, biding my time, looking for an opening in the wall of praise. After months of working 60-hour weeks, of pouring my soul into a project that I was genuinely proud of, I just wanted one crumb of recognition. I had designed and implemented a new financial compliance system from the ground up, a massive undertaking that my director had called revolutionary for our firm. It was the biggest accomplishment of my professional life, and I desperately wanted to share it. That sounds like an incredible win. Chloe. I started, my voice carefully measured, as I tried to build a bridge from her success to my own. Things at my job have been really picking up steam. 2. I just finished a huge project I was leading. That's nice. Honey. Dad's words cut me off mid-sentence. His eyes glazed over for the split second they were on me before snapping back to Chloe. His real focus. He gave a dismissive little wave of his hand. A gesture that said my news was pleasant but entirely irrelevant. So, Chloe? What exactly did the judge say about the counter-motion? Your mother and I want to hear every single detail. Don't spare us the legal jargon. And just like that, I was gone. Erased. My accomplishment. The thing that had consumed my life for the better part of a year was reduced to a, "That's nice." I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. I stabbed a piece of turkey with my fork and focused on the mechanical motion of chewing, the food tasting like ash in my mouth. My mother's attention finally drifted my way. For a brief, hopeful moment, I thought she might circle back, might ask me a follow-up question. Her expression was soft, almost maternal. "How is work?" "Dear," she asked. The question so generic, it was meaningless. Before I could even form a proper answer, her eyes had already shifted to Chloe. "You know, sweetheart," she said, completely changing the subject. "That dress is simply stunning. The color is perfect on you. You have such an innate sense of style." The compliment to Chloe served as a backhanded dismissal of me. My own new dress suddenly felt cheap, ill-fitting. The conversation had moved on without me once again. Then, as if suddenly remembering my function at the table, Mom turned back to me. "Aspen, be a dear and pass the green bean casserole. Will you?" I picked up the heavy ceramic dish, its warmth doing nothing to thaw the ice forming in my stomach, and passed it down the table. Her gaze followed the casserole, not me. I watched as she took a generous spoonful, her duty to acknowledge my existence for the next 10 minutes apparently fulfilled. A stubborn, foolish part of me refused to give up. I had to try one more time. I had to believe that if I just explained the significance of my work, they would understand. That they would see me. "The system I built is actually a really big deal," I said, my voice a little too loud. A little too disparity. "It's projected to save the company millions in potential regulatory fines. It completely overhauls our entire auditing process. My director said he's putting me up for a promotion to lead the new department." There, I had laid it all out. Promotion. Millions of dollars. Leading a department. These were the metrics they understood. The language of success they so admired in Chloe. It was then that my mother set her fork down with a soft click. She dabbed her lips with her napkin and looked at me. Not with pride, but with a look of profound, theatrical pity. "Aspen. Darling. It's sweet that you're trying so hard," she began, her voice dripping with condescension disguised as concern. "We know you're doing your best. But if you just finished that MBA, maybe you'd have more substantial news to share. Something with real prestige. You know, not just a technical project." The MBA. She had the audacity to bring up the master's degree I had sacrificed on the altar of their financial irresponsibility. The degree I put on hold 4 years ago, after a hysterical 2 a.m. phone call from her, sobbing about the foreclosure notice taped to their front door. The dream I had shelved to send them a check every single month. Without fail. For 48 consecutive months. I stared at her, speechless. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. My heart was no longer just hammering, it was a frantic, painful thudding in my ears, drowning out everything else. But she wasn't finished. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice to a confidential, conspiratorial whisper that was somehow louder than a scream. She glanced around the table, a sad little smile playing on her lips, as if she were letting everyone in on a tragic little family secret. Honestly, Aspen, she said, her eyes boring into mine, you're not half the person your sister is. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall became a deafening roar in the sudden, absolute silence that followed. Every fork was frozen midair. Every eye was on me. My father stared intently at his plate, suddenly fascinated by his gravy. Chloe had the decency to look uncomfortable, a faint blush of shame on her cheeks. But she said nothing. No one said anything. In their silence, they were all complicit. And in that crushing, suffocating silence, something inside me shifted. The years of accumulated hurt, the constant feeling of being undervalued and unseen, didn't just boil over. It flash froze. The burning rage and the stinging tears crystallized into something hard, sharp, and perfectly clear. I was no longer sad. I was no longer desperate for their approval. I was simply done. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting it out evenly. I placed my knife and fork neatly on my plate, the metallic sound unnaturally loud. When I finally spoke, my voice was devoid of emotion. It was calm, level, and colder than ice. Then maybe Chloe should pay this month's mortgage. The shockwave was palpable. My father's head shot up, his face a mask of confusion and burgeoning anger. My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish. No sound coming out. Chloe just stared, completely bewildered. I let the weight of my words hang in the air for a moment longer before I reached into my purse. My movements were slow. Precise. I pulled out my phone. With a steady hand, I unlocked it and tapped on the familiar blue and white icon of my banking app. The screen flared to life, its bright, clinical glow illuminating my face in the dimming light of the dining room. It was open to the transaction history page. A long, damning list of monthly payments sent to my parents' account. A 4-year ledger of my silent sacrifice, ready for its audit. My parents stared at the glowing screen of my phone as if it were a venomous snake coiled on the pristine white tablecloth. The long, scrolling list of transactions, each one labeled family support, was an undeniable, digital scar running through 4 years of my life. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the frantic ticking of the grandfather clock, each second stretching into an eternity. My father was the first to recover, his face flushing a deep, mottled red. He slammed his hand down on the table, making the silverware jump and the wine slosh in the glasses. Put that away. Aspen, this is neither the time nor the place for whatever this is. You're making a scene at Thanksgiving dinner. I think this is the perfect place, I replied, my voice still eerily calm. I swiped a thumb across the screen, bringing up the very first transfer, November 2nd. 4 years ago, $2,500. The text message you sent me that night, Mom, said it was a one-time thing, just to stop the bank from putting a foreclosure notice on the door. My mother, Eleanor, flinched as if I had struck her. Her face, which had been a mask of shock, crumpled into a performance of wounded fragility. How could you bring that up? We were in a crisis. We trusted you. A family helps each other. They don't keep score. You're right, I said, and a bitter, humorless smile touched my lips. You didn't keep score. I did. I locked my phone and placed it back in my purse with a quiet finality. I stood up, my chair scraping softly against the polished floor. Thank you for dinner. It was very enlightening. I didn't wait for a response. I walked out of the dining room, past the stunned faces of my aunts and uncles, grabbed my coat from the closet, and left. The cold November air was a welcome shock to my system, clearing the suffocating fog of the house from my lungs. As I drove away, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The image of their faces, my father's fury, my mother's theatrical betrayal, and Chloe's utter, helpless confusion was burned into my memory. The drive back to my small apartment was a blur. My hands were shaking, and my heart was still pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The adrenaline that had kept me so cold and composed at the table was starting to fade, leaving a hollow, trembling emptiness in its wake. My phone, lying on the passenger seat, glowed with an incoming call, my mother. I ignored it. It buzzed again, my father. I silenced it, the screen going dark. In the quiet solitude of my car, the memories I had so diligently suppressed began to surface. Sharp and painful, my mind reeled back 4 years. To that night. It was 2 a.m., and I had been jolted awake by the shrill ring of my phone. On the other end, my mother's voice was a choked, hysterical whisper. She spoke of bad investments, of my father's architectural firm hitting a rough patch he'd been too proud to admit, of final notices and the looming, unthinkable shame of foreclosure. The house they'd built their entire identity around was about to be ripped away. I was 23 years old, fresh out of college, carefully saving every spare dollar for a down payment on a small condo in downtown Denver. It was my one big dream, a symbol of the independent life I was so eager to build. We just need a little help to get through this. Honey, she had sobbed into the phone. Just this once. I promise. And I, dutiful, ever eager to please younger daughter, had believed her. That night, I logged into my bank account, my heart aching as I looked at the balance I had worked so hard to build. With trembling fingers, I transferred $2,500, a huge chunk of my dream, into their account. A single tear had rolled down my cheek and splashed onto the keyboard. Just this once, I told myself. But once became twice. It became a monthly occurrence. The excuses varied. A client was late on a payment, an unexpected property tax bill, a medical emergency that never seemed to have any follow-up documentation. Soon, it wasn't even a request anymore. It was an expectation. I set up the automatic transfer to avoid the painful monthly phone call. The transaction, a silent, recurring monument to my broken promises to myself. The dream of the condo faded first, its ghost haunting me every time I saw a for sale sign in a neighborhood I could no longer afford. Then came the MBA program I'd been accepted into. I deferred my admission once, then again, until the acceptance expired altogether. The money I'd saved for tuition was now paying for their country club membership dues. Then came the smaller sacrifices, the hundreds of tiny cuts that bleed a life dry. The trip to Europe with my friends became an impossible fantasy. Dinners out were a luxury I couldn't justify. My world shrank. My horizons narrowed, all to maintain their sprawling, beautiful lie of a life. Back in the present, I finally reached my apartment building. My apartment was small, simple, and entirely my own. It was my sanctuary. And tonight, it felt like a war room. I walked straight to my small desk, opened my laptop, and navigated to my bank's website. My fingers flew across the keyboard. There it was on the screen, the recurring monthly payment. Scheduled to go out in 3 days. Mortgage help. I had labeled it. A sad, ironic little name for the anchor that was drowning me. My cursor hovered over the cancel series button. For a heartbeat, a wave of paralyzing guilt washed over me. I could hear my mother's voice in my head. The sobs. The accusations. But then I saw her face at the dinner table. The cold dismissal in her eyes. I thought of the $84,000. And I clicked. A confirmation box popped up. Are you sure you want to cancel this scheduled payment series? A feeling I hadn't felt in years rose up in my chest. It was a terrifying, exhilarating mix of fear and freedom. I clicked confirm. The screen refreshed. The scheduled payment was gone. It was done. For 2 days, there was silence. It was a heavy, loaded silence. The kind that comes before a storm. I knew they were waiting, assuming I'd come to my senses and apologize. Then, on the 3rd day, the day the payment was supposed to have hit their account, the storm broke. It started with a text from my mother. Did you forget something? Dear, deceptively casual, utterly menacing. I ignored it. An hour later, my phone rang. It was my father. I let it go to voicemail. His message was anything but casual. His voice was tight with fury. Aspen, call me back immediately. We need to talk about this ridiculous stunt you pulled. This is not a game. I deleted the message without listening to the rest. Then came the call I had been dreading. My mother. I knew I had to answer this one. I had to hear it all. Just to know for sure. I took a deep breath and swiped to accept. Aspen, oh. Thank God. Her voice was thick with manufactured tears. I've been so worried. Your father is beside himself. What is going on with you after everything we've done for you? How could you be so cruel? What have you done for me? Mom, I asked. My voice flat. We gave you everything, a wonderful childhood, a college education. We raised you. Is this how you repay us? By trying to make us homeless right before Christmas. You're tearing this family apart. Aspen, you're breaking my heart. Every word was a carefully sharpened tool of guilt, designed to gut me. For a moment, it almost worked. The years of conditioning, of being the family's shock absorber, kicked in. But then I remembered her words at the table. You're not half the person your sister is. That memory was a shield. I'm not making you homeless, I said, my voice shaking slightly but holding firm. I am simply no longer paying for a house I don't live in. That's a boundary. And it's long overdue. I hung up before she could reply. My hands were trembling so badly I had to sit down. Was I the monster she was painting me to be? The doubt was a poisonous weed. And I knew I needed an objective opinion. An outside perspective from someone who wasn't emotionally invested. The next morning, I made an appointment with a financial advisor. I sat in a sterile, quiet office. A stack of my bank statements on the polished desk between me and a kind-faced, middle-aged man named Mr. Davies. I told him everything. My voice clinical and detached as I laid out the 4-year history of payments, the broken promises, and the expectation of my financial support. He listened patiently, occasionally jotting down notes. When I finished, He was quiet for a long moment, looking over the numbers. Finally, he looked up at me, his eyes full of a gentle, professional sympathy. "Ms. Hayes," he said, his voice firm but kind. "I want to be very clear. This isn't help. This isn't a family loan. What you've described is a classic, textbook case of financial abuse." Hearing those two words, financial abuse, was like a key turning in a lock I didn't even know existed. It wasn't me being selfish. It wasn't me being ungrateful. I was a victim. The validation from this calm, rational stranger was the armor I didn't know I needed. It solidified my resolve into something unbreakable. A few days later, as if the universe were sending me a sign, my director called me into his office. He offered me the promotion we had briefly discussed. It was to a management position, heading the new compliance department I had essentially created. The salary was a 30% increase. There was just one catch. The position was based out of their headquarters in Seattle. A different city, 1,000 miles away, a clean break. It was a lifeline. That night, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time in years, I was scrolling through social media, and then I saw it. My mother had posted a new photo album. The cover photo was of my parents and Chloe, all three of them beaming, standing in the front yard. And behind them, strung between the two large oak trees, was a massive, professionally printed banner. The words were written in a cheerful, festive font. "Thank you, Chloe, for saving our family home." I stared at the screen, the blood draining from my face. They hadn't just lied by omission. They had constructed an entirely new reality. They had taken my sacrifice, my $84,000, and gifted the credit for it to my sister, the golden child, solidifying her hero status in a lie so brazen it stole my breath. The hope I had felt just moments before was incinerated by a white-hot, silent rage. But this rage was different. It wasn't messy or loud. It was cold, sharp, and focused. I was a compliance analyst. My entire career was built on auditing records, finding discrepancies, and bringing the truth to light. And I realized my family was long overdue for a full-scale audit. They were planning a huge party that weekend to celebrate Chloe's victory and, apparently, her fictional financial heroism. I had been planning to decline. But now, a new plan began to form in my mind. A meticulous, step-by-step procedure for presenting my findings. My fingers moved to the keyboard, a strange sense of calm settling over me. I opened a web browser. First, I booked a one-way flight from Denver to Seattle for the week after the party. Then, I booked another flight, a round-trip ticket from Seattle to Denver. Arriving the morning of the party and leaving the next day, the confirmation emails landed in my inbox. 2 digital keystones in the foundation of my new life. One flight was for my escape. The other was for the reckoning. The week leading up to the party was the calmest I had felt in 4 years. The decision had been made. The flights were booked. And the path forward was clear. The storm of manipulative phone calls and guilt-ridden text messages from my parents had ceased, replaced by an unnerving, icy silence. They were giving me the cold shoulder, assuming, I'm sure, that the punishment of their disapproval would be enough to break me and send me crawling back with an apology. They didn't know that their silence was the greatest gift they had ever given me. It gave me the space to prepare. The night before the party, I was in a sterile, anonymous hotel room a few miles from my parents' house. I had flown in that afternoon. The short flight from Seattle feeling like a journey across a vast emotional ocean. On the small desk under the dim, yellow light of a lamp, I laid out my evidence. My audit. I had printed every single bank statement showing the 48 transfers. I had printed screenshots of the text message conversations, highlighting my mother's increasingly desperate pleas and my own placating responses. I had even printed the initial email from my father, sent from his business account 4 years ago, outlining their dire financial situation with a cold, formal detachment that belied the panic underneath. I organized them into a neat, chronological file inside a slim black portfolio. Each piece of paper was a ghost, a reminder of a sacrifice I had made in the name of a love I never truly received. There was no rage in my movements, no trembling in my hands. That had all burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard sense of purpose. I felt like I was preparing for the most important presentation of my career, and in a way, I was. I was presenting the case for my own life. I rehearsed my opening lines in my head, not to memorize them, but to strip them of any lingering emotion, to make them as sharp and undeniable as the numbers on the pages. The next evening, I drove to their house. As I turned onto their street, I saw it was lined with cars, the warm glow of the party spilling out from the windows into the crisp winter night. My parents' home was alive with light and laughter. A perfect picture of festive celebration, a perfect stage for a tragedy. I took one last deep breath in the quiet of my rental car, the black portfolio feeling heavy and significant on the passenger seat next to me. Then I got out and walked toward the front door. I walked in without knocking. The party was in full swing. A caterer was serving champagne, and a soft jazz melody played from hidden speakers. About 40 or 50 people, family, friends, neighbors were mingling, their voices a cheerful, meaningless buzz. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were a ghost observing a life that was no longer mine. My mother saw me first, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second before being plastered back on. She glided over, her dress shimmering under the chandelier. "Aspen, you came," she said, her voice a low, warning hiss under the guise of a greeting. "I'm glad you decided to be reasonable." "I'm just here to celebrate Chloe," I said evenly, meeting her gaze without flinching. I saw my sister across the room, surrounded by a group of admirers. She looked happy, radiant, and completely oblivious. As I got closer, she saw me and her face broke into a genuine, beautiful smile. She came over and gave me a real hug. "Aspen, I'm so glad you're here. I was worried after Thanksgiving." I hugged her back, and for a moment, a pang of sadness hit me. She was my sister, but she was also a symbol of the lie that had cost me so much. I pulled away gently, managing a small smile of my own. "You deserve all the attention you're getting tonight." "Chloe, really?" The hidden meaning in my words flew right over her head, and she just beamed. For the next hour, I played my part. I made small talk with my aunts and uncles. I accepted a glass of sparkling water. I watched my parents work the room, their faces masks of proud, loving parents. I saw them point to the infamous banner, still hanging in the foyer, and accept congratulations on Chloe's behalf. Every word of praise for her was a fresh twist of the knife in my back, stealing my resolve. They were basking in the warmth of a fire I had secretly paid for. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. My father, Richard, stepped to the center of the living room, a fresh glass of champagne in his hand. He tapped it gently with a small spoon. Ting, ting, ting. The cheerful buzz of conversation slowly died down as all eyes turned to him. If I could have everyone's attention for a moment, he began, his voice filled with practiced patriarchal warmth. Eleanor and I just want to say a few words. As you all know, we've been through a challenging few years. But through it all, we've been so blessed. And our biggest blessing has been our wonderful daughter, Chloe. This was it. This was my cue. As he paused for dramatic effect, I stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. Dad, if it's okay, I said, my voice clear and polite, but loud enough to carry through the quiet room. Could I say something first? I'd also like to say a few words about Chloe. And about this house. My father froze, his smile tightening. He was trapped. He couldn't refuse without causing a scene and shattering the perfect image he was trying to project. He gave a stiff, almost imperceptible nod. Of course. Aspen. The floor is yours. I walked to the center of the room, my heart a steady, slow drum in my chest. I could feel every eye on me. I turned to the crowd, my gaze sweeping over their curious faces before landing on my parents, and then on Chloe. Thank you. I began, my voice as smooth as glass. We're all here tonight to celebrate something truly special. We're celebrating saving this family home. A truly remarkable achievement. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I looked directly at Chloe. A soft, sad smile on my face. And it's an achievement that cost exactly $84,721.54. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw Chloe's brow furrow in confusion. My father's face was turning from red to a pale, ashen gray. I reached into my bag and pulled out the black portfolio. I know that's a very specific number, I continued, my voice never wavering. That's because I have the receipts. I opened the portfolio. This, I said, holding up the first thick stack of papers, is a complete record of my bank statements for the past 48 months. It shows a monthly transfer, ranging from $1,200 to $2,500, from my account to my parents' account. I let my eyes find my mother's. The account I took the money from was my savings account, the one I had originally named my first home. A collective gasp went through the room. The silence was no longer polite. It was thick with shock. But numbers are impersonal. I went on, my voice hardening slightly. So maybe this will be more personal. I held up a printed screenshot of a text message. The screen enlarged so people could see the words. This is a message from my mother. Dated November 2nd. 4 years ago. It reads Aspen. Honey, I'm so sorry to ask. Your father is too proud. We got a final notice. We'll lose the house if you can't help us. I swear it's just this one time. Oh, I didn't need to look at my mother. I could feel the heat of her shame from across the room. I continued, my voice a relentless, factual torrent. I spoke of the deferred MBA, the lost opportunities, the quiet, lonely nights spent working extra hours to make up for the money I was sending them. With every sentence, I was dismantling the beautiful facade of their lives, brick by painful brick. Aspen, that is enough, my father finally roared, finding his voice. This is a private family matter. You are not well. You're right. It is a family matter, I countered, turning to face him directly. A matter of a family that was happy to cash my checks while telling me I wasn't good enough. A family that built a monument to my sister on a foundation of my money and my silence. My mother started to sob, A theatrical, self-pitying sound. How could you do this to us, to your sister? Chloe was just standing there, her face white, looking back and forth between me and our parents, the terrible truth finally dawning in her eyes. The room was a powder keg of tension, ready to explode. My parents were about to rally, to paint me as the hysterical, unstable daughter. But then, something unexpected happened. From the back of the room, a single, deliberate sound cut through the silence. Clap. It was my Aunt Carol, my father's older sister. Clap. She was looking at my parents, her face a mask of cold, long overdue fury. Clap. A few other people, cousins and old family friends who had seen the dynamics for years, slowly began to join her. It wasn't a standing ovation. It was a slow, steady, damning rhythm of support. For me, for the truth. Aunt Carol's voice was low and clear. It's about damn time someone told the truth in this house. That was it. That was the moment of victory. The shift in the room was absolute. The looks of pity and confusion that had been directed at me were now aimed squarely at my parents, transformed into expressions of contempt and disgust. My audit was complete. The findings were public. I looked at my parents one last time, their faces a mixture of horror and defeat. I looked at my sister, who was now crying silent tears of her own. I placed the black portfolio on a nearby table, leaving the evidence for all to see. Then, without another word, I turned around and walked out. I didn't run. I walked calmly through the stunned crowd, out the front door, and into the cool, clean night air. I left the wreckage of their lies behind me, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt completely and utterly free. Tuyệt vời. Đây là chương 4. Chương cuối cùng của câu chuyện. Bắt đầu ngay từ khoảnh khắc Aspen bước ra khỏi cánh cửa và đưa hành trình cảm xúc của cô đến một cái kết trọn vẹn và xứng đáng. I didn't hear the applause fade. I didn't hear the shouting that I knew must have erupted the second the door clicked shut behind me. All I heard was the frantic, triumphant pounding of my own heart and the sound of my shoes on the cold flagstone walkway. The night air was crisp and clean, and I inhaled it deeply, a cleansing breath that seemed to scour the last 4 years of dust and deceit from my lungs. I got into my rental car, the engine humming to life in the quiet, tree-lined street. And I drove. I didn't speed. I didn't race away like a fugitive. I drove calmly, my hands steady on the wheel, my gaze fixed on the road ahead. The adrenaline from the confrontation was beginning to recede, and in its place, a profound, bone-deep sense of finality settled over me. It was over. The lies, the obligation, the crushing weight of their expectations, all of it had been incinerated in the fire of the truth I had finally spoken aloud. I drove back to the anonymous hotel, the city lights blurring into long streaks of color through my windshield. Back in the sterile quiet of my room, I took off the black dress, my armor, and let it fall to the floor. I felt strangely light, as if I had shed a physical weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a text from a number I knew was Chloe's. My finger hovered over the notification, a flicker of the old, conditioned guilt rising within me. I took a breath and opened it. I don't understand any of this. We need to talk. Please. Aspen. Her confusion, her pain. I was palpable even in those few words. A year ago, a month ago, even a week ago, that text would have sent me spiraling. I would have called her back, desperate to explain, to manage her feelings. to absorb her shock as my own. But tonight was different. I knew this was her journey to take now. The truth was laid bare. She and my parents would have to navigate the wreckage on their own. I put my phone on silent, climbed into bed, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next morning, I drove to the airport and boarded my one-way flight to Seattle. As the plane ascended, banking over the snow-capped Rockies, I didn't feel like I was running away. I felt like I was flying toward my own life. 6 months later, the persistent Denver sunshine felt like a distant memory, replaced by the soft, silvery light of a Seattle spring. I was sitting in a cozy coffee shop near Pike Place Market. The air rich with the scent of roasted coffee beans and damp earth. Outside the large window, a gentle rain was falling, washing the city clean. Everything about this place felt different. Calmer. My life was different. I was different. The bell over the door chimed, and I looked up to see my sister. Chloe. Walk in. She looked thinner, her usual radiant confidence replaced by a hesitant uncertainty. This was the first time we had seen each other since that night. After a few initial, broken text exchanges, we had settled into a quiet truce, agreeing to talk when the dust had truly settled. Now, she had flown across 2 states to be here. She saw me and gave a small, nervous smile. Hey, she said, her voice barely a whisper as she slid into the booth across from me. Hey, I replied. Thanks for coming. The silence between us was heavy with everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. The barista brought her coffee, and Chloe wrapped her hands around the warm mug as if it were a lifeline. Finally, she looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I saw it all after you left. She began, her voice cracking. Aunt Carol. She made them sit down. She made them look at the papers you left. I read the texts. Aspen. All of them. I saw the bank statements. She took a shaky breath. It was ugly. Dad just kept yelling about betrayal. Mom just cried and said you were twisting things. That you were ungrateful. But the proof was right there. It was undeniable. The party just dissolved. People just quietly left. One by one. No one knew what to say. It was the most humiliating night of their lives. I listened, feeling a strange lack of satisfaction. There was no joy in hearing about their downfall. There was only a quiet, sad sense of validation. I am so sorry. Aspen, Chloe whispered. And this time, the tears spilled over, rolling down her cheeks. It's the ugliest truth I've ever had to face. But I was a part of it. I was so wrapped up in my own world, in being the golden child, that I never stopped to look. I never saw what you were carrying. I was blind. And I was selfish. And I am so sorry. Her apology was a simple, powerful thing. It was the words I had once thought I needed to hear from my parents. But hearing them from her, so raw and so genuine, meant more. It was an acknowledgment, a validation. It was the beginning of a bridge across the canyon that had opened up between us. I forgive you, Chloe, I said. And the words felt true as they left my lips. You were a product of the same system I was. They needed a hero. And they needed a scapegoat. We just played the parts they assigned us. We talked for another hour. The conversation slowly shifting from the painful past to the tentative present. She told me our parents had sold the house. They couldn't afford it without my contributions. But more than that, they couldn't stand the shame of living there anymore. They had downsized to a small condo across town and had cut ties with most of the family, including Aunt Carol. They had never once mentioned my name, and they had never tried to call me. They had simply erased me from the narrative, just as they had tried to do for my entire life. "Does it bother you?" Chloe asked gently. "That they've never apologized?" I thought about it for a moment, swirling the last of my cold coffee in my cup. "It used to," I admitted. "I used to think I needed their apology to be whole. But I don't. My peace is no longer dependent on their remorse. My freedom isn't something they can grant me. I had to take it for myself." It was then that I got to tell her about my new life. I told her about my promotion to vice president of the compliance department. I told her about the upcoming National Finance Conference in San Francisco, where I was going to be a keynote speaker, presenting on the very systems I had designed. My voice didn't waver. For the first time, I spoke about my accomplishments with an unshakable sense of my own worth. And I finally did it. "Chloe," I said, a real smile spreading across my face. "I bought my first home." I described my new apartment in Queen Anne, a beautiful space with huge windows that looked out over the sparkling waters of Elliott Bay. I told her how I had used the money I was no longer sending to my parents to make the down payment. The savings account I had once bitterly renamed was now finally fulfilling its original purpose. After we said our goodbyes, with a real hug and a promise to build something new, something honest, I walked home. The rain had stopped, and the late afternoon sun was breaking through the clouds, casting a golden light over the city. I let myself into my apartment. The feeling of turning my own key in my own lock, still a small, daily miracle. I walked out onto my small balcony, leaning against the railing and looking out at the water. The view was breathtaking. Ferries glided across the bay, and the Olympic Mountains stood like sleeping giants in the distance. This was my life. A life I had built not on sacrifice and silence, but on truth and boundaries. My phone buzzed in my pocket. For a split second, the old, familiar dread spiked in my chest. An emergency. A demand. A crisis. But it wasn't them. It was a friend from work, asking if I wanted to grab dinner later. I smiled. A genuine, easy smile that reached my eyes. I was no longer a secret ATM. No longer a ghost at the family table. I was just Aspen. And for the first time in my life, that felt like more than enough. I typed back my reply. My future as bright and open as the bay stretched out before me.